Welcome, everybody. I'd like to welcome our audience from the Sparx Systems YouTube channel. It's great to have you here as always. We are continuing our exploration of the urban parking system that's being developed in Sparx Systems Enterprise Architect. And over a number of videos, we've developed a range of different diagrams and models. My name's Scott Hebbard, and I'm joined by Stephen McGuire. And today we're going to be looking at a continuation of the BPMN notation, and we're going to be looking at a collaboration diagram. So Stephen, welcome, and can you tell us what part of the collaboration diagram are we going to look at in this particular video?
Thanks for the introduction, Scott. Appreciate that. Yes, today we are going to be looking at a collaboration diagram, which is one of the diagrams that's part of the business process model and notation language, commonly referred to as BPMN. The collaboration diagram is useful for representing participants and the interactions that go on between them. So we've seen this a number of times in other videos, but this is a slightly different view of that. We represent the participants as pools, so a rectangular representation of the participant, and we look at the messages that flow between the different pools. There is a concept of white box and black box. I prefer to call it clear box and black box. Clear box meaning you can see through it and see into the box of what's happening, and black box meaning you can't see in the details inside the box or the pool are hidden. So we're going to look at that. So let's take a dive into this really quite exciting topic, and let's, as always, set our perspective. So I have been doing some work with wireframes earlier today, and so I had that perspective set. But let's change our perspective. We use the drop down in the top right-hand corner of the application, and we see perspective sets. So groups of perspectives, and we know we want to do business modeling, and we know that it's part of the business process model and notation, conveniently abbreviated there as BPMN. So we click on that, and Enterprise Architect sets the stage by putting up a builder page. This is useful because I can, look at different types of diagrams here, and we can look at choreography diagrams for various things. These are a very useful way and productive way to start modeling. But as always, Scott, I want to start from first principles. Once you've understood how to create these diagrams, by all means, go back and use the power of these patterns to give you a kickstart in your modeling. So I'm not suggesting you don't use them, but my task today is to show you things from first principles so you know how to do this from scratch.
I assume the patterns are going to make much more sense once you understand all of the fundamental first principles of how to build the diagram up.
Exactly, Scott. And if you wanted to, you could use them to try and learn about it. But let's watch the video. I'll get people to look at what we're doing from first principles. We've got our perspective set now. We need to find a location for this diagram inside the repository. And specifically, we're going to use the project browser tree view to do that. Inside our urban parking system, we have a number of packages. And conveniently, I've got one called business models. So that seems like a good place to put this. You can see that we've got a number of other diagrams and packages there. So I'm going to expand this panel out a little bit and conveniently move these panels around, and it can change their shape. We have got a conversation diagram and a two-participant choreography diagram before. So let's have a very quick look at those. I'll have a look at our choreography diagram, and you can see that it's a diagram where the participants are represented in bands inside the choreography element. And so that's one way of looking at the messages that are going between participants. And the other one is the conversation diagram, which is this one where we can click through and see the messages going between the two participants. So let's close those ones for a minute and let's start from scratch. And as always, we're going to create a package that can house this. And I'm going to call the package, I think we're going to call it the BPMN collaboration diagram for a dispute between a motorist and the council with respect to infringement. So we choose a suitable name for the package, and we could create the diagram from scratch there as well, but we're starting from there. But I like to do that as a separate step to show people how that can be done. But you can click on that radio button there and have it created as part of this process. So having created the package, I'm going to create a process. It's a collaboration diagram we want to create. Enterprise Architect has conveniently populated the diagram name with the default name, which came from the package. So we'll create that. And again, we're confronted with this dialog box asking us which way we want to do something. And do we want to create a collaboration model or just start creating these elements directly inside the package? And as always, Scott, with these kind of models, it's better to create an explicit collaboration model element. So I'm going to say OK to that. And we're ready to go. You notice that we get a blank canvas. We can start our modeling from fresh, and we get a toolbox that has got 2 pages in it, collaboration elements, got pools and lanes and conversations and things. And we've also got a collaboration connectors. And just to mention this in passing, we have BPMN types that can be used across the different diagrams. So we've got participants and endpoints and signals and things. We're going to ignore that, and we'll look at that in a more advanced video at a later time. The first thing we want to do is we want to create a pool. So the collaboration diagram is about the interaction between participants, but they're represented in a pool. So I'm going to put a pool in here, and I'm going to call this motorist. And I want another pool that's going to represent the city council. So I'll put another pool into the diagram, and I'm going to call this one city council. So as always, Scott, I'd like to name these elements and put their descriptions in. So, in addition to the name, I'll put in a description of the motorist, and let's put that into our model here. Press it back onto this monitor, and we'll say that the motorist is the external participant who receives the infringement notice. So unfortunately, most of us seem to have been in that position at one time or another, getting a parking infringement, and you'll probably know something about the process that goes on here. So the City Council, I want to put some notes in about them, and let's now look at what else we can do in this model. So one of the things I want to do is look at this motorist, and I'm going to say that I want it to be a black box pool. So in the properties window, you see with that element selected in the diagram, there's an option here saying black box pool, false. And I want to say that that's true. So I want it to be true, that I don't want to be able to look inside what the motorist is doing. I'm not concerned with what they're doing. I'm interested in the messages that are being sent between the council and the motorist, but I'm not looking inside, the motorist's house when they're discussing their infringement with their partner or working out how they're going to do something. I'm just going to treat it as a black box that I can't see. So watch what happens when I select that option. You can see that it changes the look of that into a different shape. Let's just expand that out a little bit. Now let's look at this pool here and say, look, there are actually a couple of different things that are going on inside the council. And, an organisation like a council, any other organisation, can have a number of different sections or teams of people that are working. So let's represent those with a lane. And conveniently on our toolbox, we have a lane there. We can drop it onto the diagram inside the pool, and we'll call it operations. So we'll leave that lane there. You can see it's conveniently structured like that. Let's put another lane on here, and let's call this lane the dispute resolution team. So typically, in these sort of organizations, you'd have a team that would be dealing with the dispute. So we'll do that, and now we've got that formulated, we can, change the shape of these things a little bit. But let's expand this one down and, watch what happens. Enterprise Architect conveniently move that down, make some more space for us. So the first thing that's going to happen is going to be at the council's side of things. So that's how things are going to start. And let's put in a start node inside the lane, which is inside the pool, and we'll put in a start event there. So the start event, let's just say that there's we've got some sort of message.
And there's a few other options. What are they? Are they specified by BPMN or?
Yeah, so they're part of the BPMN specification, saying that a start node can have markers in it that represent different ways that something could start. For example, if you were starting a review process, you might use a timer to say that the review happened every 6 months. You may get a signal from another application saying that something has triggered this thing to happen from another application. It could be a compensation, a message. So let's presume that it is a message that's come through. Yep. And you'll see that when I do that, a little marker will pop up inside the.
Does that change the icon based on what you select? Right.
Yeah, it changes the marker inside that start event. So let's call this infringement notice. Infringement, let's call it resolution, because there's a few things going on in there. So infringement resolution, and we'll come back and put some description in there in a minute, but let's just move on with our topic. Now, often I drag things from the toolbox because I want to show people, how to do that. But with BPMN diagrams particularly, a very useful thing is to use the quick linker. The quick linker is available with the element selected on the right-hand side of the element, and it's a little arrow indicating that, I can create some type of connector. I simply drag that out. And always good to sort of position it where you think it could be. I could put it up here or, down into this box, but I actually want it moving along here a little bit. So I drop that down. Now, again, I get an option of what type of element do I want to create? I want to create an activity, and I want it to be a sequence flow from the start node, the start event, into this activity. And I get the opportunity to say, what type of activity it is, and I'll issue the notice. Now, again, I get a lot of different options here. It's manual, receive, server, send, script, and user. The user one is my favorite by default. It doesn't mean that this will be a manual operation. You can see there's already another option there. It means that it could be a combination of both a human and a system doing this. So you could imagine the situation where the parking infringement is actually issued automatically as a result of something that went on a parking inspector's tablet as they were walking around. It went through all sorts of different systems and did this automatically. So that could be described later in the detail and how this is going to be implemented. Let's just say user for the moment, and let's just say it's issue notice. So we can look at that, move this along with the conveniently there. I've got show direction on in the helper panel. So if you look up at the layout ribbon, I've got helpers on there, and I'm showing the direction of that connector. I'll just leave that on for a minute, but I just wanted to show you, or turn it off, and you can see that that's making the color go back to its default. Now with that element selected, it's saying that there's an incoming relationship from the start event. So the process would now go on, but what are we going to do? We're going to send this infringement notice, and it's going to go to the motorist. So let me just make a little bit more space here, and I can conveniently do that by selecting these pools and lanes and moving them down. I want a little bit of separation here between my motorist and the box there for operations. So now I'm going to create a message flow. Very important from a business process model and notation point of view. The word notation is the emphasis here. A sequence flow occurs within the same pool. So you can see that I used a sequence flow between the start event and the activity. But whenever I'm crossing across a pool boundary, I can't use that the sequence flow, because the sequence flow is saying, I know what I'm doing. I've got control of the way that messages are flowing. You know, you can imagine people in previous eras walking around with documents and things between people's inbox and outbox. All of that is occurring inside the organization. But the minute that you need to send something to another organization, it's different. You need to put it into an envelope. You need to package it up. You need to put it through the postal system. So that's the equivalent that's going on here. The message flow is what we're going to use. So we're going to connect that from the issue notice up to the motorist pool. And this is where the black box idea comes from. We can see inside. So again, I don't use white box. I prefer to use glass box. We can see inside the city council's world, inside the pools, inside the lanes, but we cannot see inside the motorist. So all we can do is attach that or target the motorist pool itself. So again, I need to give that a name, and I'm going to call it infringement notice. So that's the message that's going across there. I conveniently give it a name, makes sense to people when they're looking at the diagram. And once again, I, as always, want to put some, notes into this to explain exactly what it is, even though, sadly, most of us would know exactly what an infringement notice is. And so we'll put that there, but there's a description of it. So, that's the beginning of the diagram, Scott. It's not much more difficult than that. We've got, 2 lanes set up here inside the council. We could have more lanes. We could have, a payment lane as like the accounting lane as well for the accounting department that's, perhaps processing money when this motorist gets around to paying their infringement, if they do. But we'll look at what's going to happen. The motorist has got the opportunity to dispute this infringement notice and say, look, I think your parking inspector was overzealous. I did have a permit. It was displayed in my windscreen. He didn't see it. She didn't see it for some reason, and I want to dispute it. So what I'm going to do is finish off the diagram, Scott, but I'll get you to perform some of your time travel magic, and I'll see you back here in a few seconds.
Performed a little bit of time traveling editing magic, and now we have our completed BPMN collaboration diagram, and it looks nice and bright and colourful, so I can see the lanes and the pools and the start events and the gateways and everything else. So Stephen, can you perhaps give us a little bit more detail about what this diagram's doing and what the end result gives us and the City Council and how it can be used?
Yeah, I'd be delighted to, Scott. Yes, we have completed the diagram, and you can see now that it's got a number of different elements in it. But the process of doing these things was very similar to what we saw in the earlier part of the video. So I'm going to use the pan and zoom window here, and I'm going to, make this a little bit larger, and then use the focus rectangle to move around the diagram a little bit. So that's one way of doing it. But of course, I can also use the portals window. I'd make some more space for myself because I'm not going to be at the moment using the toolbox. I can use this little chevron here, put the toolbox away. Gives me a fair bit of look at my diagram. So maybe that's enough. But I could also go to the portals window here and using the workspaces portal, go into wide view. So that's another way to be able to look at diagrams more usefully. And the other thing I could do is if I wanted to, I could minimize the ribbons as well and give myself a little bit of vertical space. So that's a trick that a lot of people don't know. In Enterprise Architect, I encourage you to use the right mouse click menu, what I call the context menu, because there are often some great gems hidden under that that can increase your productivity. Let's minimize that ribbon for a minute. And you can see now that we've got a little bit more space for our diagram. We are using a legend, Scott, to help us color the diagram to make it more obvious. Now, this legend is dynamically changing the color of these elements. So it's not something that I have to manually do. It's happening there automatically as part of the productivity features of the tool. The remember the take-home message about this is that it's a collaboration diagram. So it's talking about the type of collaboration going on between different participants, and the participants are represented as pools. And, you know, thinking in that swimming sense, you've got a pool here and you've got various lanes in it. So we've got 2 lanes inside the city council, and we've got this operations one and a dispute resolution team. We could also have, as I suggested before, you know, the accounting team as well, and or, you know, customer relations or something where the dispute became a little bit inflamed and, you know, someone needed to step in from that department as well. The most important thing is the concept of control flows and message flows, and you can see that they are in our BPMN collaboration legend here. The control flows always exist within the same pool. They can cross lane boundaries as these ones do, but they exist within the same pool. When we're crossing to another pool, we use a message flow. So this one here, the infringement notice, you can see, I'm just moving that around so you can see it. That's going between the pool and the council pool and the motorist. And, you know,
none of those blue lines can go across to the motorist, I assume.
No, that's right. And they shouldn't, obviously. And here we have this situation where one part of the diagram is people say white box, I say clear box, that you can see inside it. So we can see inside this pool, inside the lanes, we can see the activities, we can see the control flows that are moving between them. And we can also now see that there's a connection between the between an activity here and the motorist pool, but we can't go inside the motorist pool to see what they're doing. So that's the diagram in a nutshell. We haven't detailed this process out in a very detailed fashion, but you can see that there's things going on inside the pool there. So I'm going to put this back into the portals here, and let's have a look at going into a basic one where we're going to go into the workspaces and we're going to choose, you know, core modeling there again. Now, Scott, this is an interesting thing here. The tool is using under the hood, if you like, control flows, which are part of the UML. But what we've got actually here is a sequence flow. Now, I've deliberately done that on the legend, and if more astute people may have picked this up, we've got a control flow here registered, but the actual BPMN type is actually a sequence flow. So let's go into our legend and have a look at that and see what we can do to change that. I wanted to draw attention to it because it's an important thing. So here we have 2 panels on our legend, the element panel or tab and the connector tab, right? So here we have a sequence flow, and we put the display value as control flow. So this is indicating that we can have a different representation, and we need to write the value as sequence flow without a space because that's what the formal stereotype is. But we can put anything in here at all, and it is more rightly called a sequence flow in BPMN. But wanted to draw your attention to it because it's a very useful thing to be able to change the presentation of that. And it might be that you, for instance, don't want to use the formal BPMN language. You may want to say something that's different to that your audience may understand. And again, no harm done there. And again, here we can see the message flow connector there. Let's have a look at that one as well. And we can put a space in that to make that a more natural representation. So lots of options with that. And remember, this legend is something that I've reused. I haven't magically put this, created this legend. I've reused it from a previous model. So if I select that legend in the diagram, go to this icon here to find the context element, and you can see what it's done is it's found that in a library of legends. So I can reuse that across not just this project, but multiple projects, and I can use it lots and lots of times. So a very useful thing. And as
And I'm
always,
assuming you could take those legends, copy the package, put it into another instance of Enterprise Architect and reuse it that way across projects.
exactly right, Scott. If you've got different repositories, then yes, you can just simply copy and paste that package. And as always, I can just right mouse click on it and say copy. And I'm going to say full structure for duplication there. That's going to copy everything. Conveniently goes into the clipboard. I don't need to, put it out to a file or anything. Just in the clipboard, open up my other repository and paste it in by using the paste command. So that's it for the collaboration diagram, Scott. I think it's an example that we probably all don't want to dwell on too much. The infringement notice coming from some sort of parking violation, but hopefully you go down the route that says you've disputed the infringement and you're able to get a cancellation notice from the issuer.
No, that's fantastic. Well, thanks, Stephen, for showing us how to build a collaboration diagram from first principles and how some of the message flows and sequence flows actually work. And I think it's a very simple diagram that shows the interaction between some of the various pools in the city council and how they interact with the motorist. And I now understand the difference between a black box, which is the motorist, so you can't see inside, and the clear box. As always, we encourage our audience that is watching on YouTube to like, comment, and subscribe. We love hearing your feedback, and we love hearing questions about our various videos. And so please contribute and feel free to share the video, or in fact, there's a few playlists. You could share those playlists with your friends and colleagues that might be interested in this content. So thank you once again. Thanks, Stephen, for all your hard work. It's been great to learn a little bit more about BPMN and about collaboration diagrams. So thank you so much.
My pleasure, Scott. And always remember, we've only just scratched the surface of the tool's capabilities. But thank you for the opportunity of presenting this information.
Excellent.